Hi everyone, welcome to the Hadoop and Big Data tutorial. This is the 6th module in the session and we will be talking about Sqoop. In the previous modules we spoke about Big Data solution, we spoke about Hadoop, we spoke about MapReduce and the processing engine and the core components of Hadoop. So this is the very first module in the utilities which sits on top of Hadoop. If you remember my Hadoop ecosystem, the ecosystem consists of n number of different utilities and one of them is Sqoop. Right? So let me just go over and see what we have covered. We have covered this big data and we have covered the Hadoop fundamentals. In the subsequent modules we have covered MapReduce and we have covered HDFS architecture in detail. In this module I will be focusing on Sqoop. So Sqoop is data loading technique and data ingestion technique, and we will be talking about how we can load data from relational database management system or RDBMS system into the Sqoop. So as part of this module what I will be covering is I will be talking about these things. I will be talking about what and how you can do data loading. Okay, so say for example you have your system available here which is your Hadoop cluster, and you have to insert data from multiple different sources which are outside your system or outside the cluster. Okay, so how do you go about inserting this data? Say for example this is my RDBMS system and all of my different systems are having different RDBMS. So this one is using SQL, this can use an Oracle, this can use MySQL, and this can use Postgre. Okay, so these are different systems and they are holding different set of data. So if for my analysis purpose, if my need is to pull in all the data from different sources before I start my analysis purpose, so what tool I need to use? How do I pull the data from different sources into Hadoop, and how do I analyze my data into my Hadoop? Okay, and once the analysis is done, I might have to push data back for the reporting purpose again to different systems. And this is where Sqoop comes very handy utility, because this is one of the data ingestion tool that will help to get the data into the cluster. We have also seen other data ingestion tool like Hadoop command, which was getting a data from a local file system and putting it into the cluster, right? So let's go ahead and talk more about what we will be covering. So we will be covering what is Sqoop in detail. I just gave you an overview of what is the capability of the Sqoop, and we will see and look into the architecture, what exactly happens, how Sqoop takes care of this movement of a data internally. Okay, how does it divide the entire task into multiple subtasks and then try to do a parallelism processing so that the data moved from any external sources will be much faster when it moved to Hadoop through the Sqoop. Okay, we will talk about the architecture. We will also talk about the different versioning of Sqoop. Right now we will be dealing with the different versions, and all of the versions which we will be dealing with is Sqoop version 1, though there is a discussion happening and Sqoop version 2 is under progress at this point of time. Okay, we will see now, start seeing the basic commands like the versioning of Sqoop. How do I verify which version of Sqoop is running? Then we will go into more details into how do I, if my database is MySQL, how do I my Sqoop connect to my SQL and push the data into my Hadoop cluster. Okay, we'll see step by step operation, and we will try to use certain tools which comes on top of Sqoop. Okay, then we will see certain more commands like listing databases. How do I list my database? How do I list all the tables if I am connected to any of this database? Okay, if I have to see the list of tables within the database, I literally have to go over this table, connect to the client whatever is available for MySQL or the SQL server, and then fire the command like list databases or list tables. With the Sqoop, you don't have to go into multiple systems. You can fire the command sitting here on top of your Hadoop cluster and just give the connection properties when you are firing the command, so that it could connect to different connectors and tell you the list of tables and databases which are available. Okay, so this is very important when you are willing to see the schema of a table which you are planning to pull. Okay, importing table with MapReduce task. Okay, so once we see how the Sqoop works, it will make more sense how we can configure it to increase the parallelism. Okay, as I mentioned, MapReduce is a parallel processing engine, right? It provides a parallel processing capability for the Hadoop. Testing. Okay, so as we mentioned, once we start moving a data from any of the system to your Hadoop, the main task for any tester is to test out that output. Okay, so how do we go about testing the output once we move the data? Okay, we will go ahead and do for a single table, and then we go ahead and do with multiple tables. We will see where the directory structure where the data is present into the Hadoop, and we'll start validating the data. We'll also see how we can optimize it with lesser number of parameters which is getting passed in the Sqoop, and we will try to build upon that. Then we'll do multiple changes in our import utility. We will try to filter out certain rows and then pull the data. We'll also try to import all the tables and then validate it. Okay, and then we'll also try to write certain queries so that how and what data I need is more in control of under my control rather than in the control of Sqoop. Okay, so let's start with more on Sqoop, what Sqoop is and what Sqoop is not. So the definition of Sqoop goes something like this. Sqoop is open source tool that allows you to extract data from structured data stored into Hadoop for further processing. So as I mentioned, all these are structured data sources. Okay, and Sqoop is providing you a capability to pull it into the cluster. Okay, so these are my relational database management system which are structured. Efficiently transfers bulk data between Hadoop and structured data sources. As I mentioned, this is very efficient transfer, and it takes care of parallelism and power of Hadoop. Apache Hadoop effectively Sqoop helps offload certain tasks from EDW to Hadoop for efficient execution at a much lower cost. So if you are not aware of EDW, let me just go back to the EDW concept or a data warehousing concept. In a data warehousing concept, in place of Hadoop, you will have a data warehouse, and that data warehouse can be any of a data warehousing database. It can be a Teradata, for instance. And Teradata is a data warehouse database where all the data from different sources are been pulled in. Okay, stored it before it is further used for transformation and loading and reporting. So the process of extracting a data or getting a data from different sources, in terminology of ETL, it is the extraction part or the E part over here. Okay, E stands for extraction. So this is the E which stands for extraction, and extraction is nothing but to push the data from different sources and pull it into the Teradata. Then the transformation happens, and where we have MapReduce as a transformation engine, as well as we have PIG and all available over here. And then finally the loading happens in the data warehousing solution, that is HIVE. Okay. So if you are moving from ETL, it is more important to understand the process, how it fits into the ETL process. And as you see, this is the extraction process which we are talking about now, or in terminology of Hadoop, it is called data ingestion. We are ingesting the data into the Hadoop cluster. Okay. Though there is a mechanism to have any databases, okay, it includes your data warehouse database also, right? So this can include this database also, Teradata, to push the data into the Hadoop cluster, right? Sqoop can be used to extract data from Hadoop and export it into external. Okay, so that is what the bidirectional thing which I was talking about. It can also help you to pull the data out of Hadoop and push it to the Teradata. So when you are pulling a data from external database and letting the data go into the Hadoop cluster, that is called import. I am importing the data, right? And once you have a data which is processed in Hadoop and you want to push back to SQL or any outside utility, it is called export utility. Okay. So these are the two key functions which are provided in the Sqoop: import and export. Right? Sqoop works with a relational database. As I mentioned, it can be a Teradata, it can be a Netezza, and it can be any other database. Okay. So let's go ahead and see how Sqoop works. We have seen this is the process. Now the working of Sqoop is very, very important to understand. Let me try to take a screenshot of what exactly and how it works. Okay. So if you see from the diagram over here, which I am planning to capture, oops, let me capture the entire thing. Okay. So if you see this is my, if I am firing a command, I need to use a Sqoop client interface, or I will call it as CLI. So when we install Sqoop, this is what it will come up with. You have a client interface where you fire your command, and the client interface will process the command for anything which is missing, the syntactical error or the semantic error, and then the command is like pushed back. Okay. And what it does internally, if it has to pull or push a data from any of the system, it can be enterprise data warehouse, or it can be relational database management system, or it can be document based system. Document based system is more which I am talking about is NoSQL databases, right? Relational database you understand, and this is a data warehouse database. Okay. And the final destination can be one of this. It can push the data into HDFS, which is the distributed file system of Hadoop, or it can push directly the data into HBase, which is a NoSQL database, or it can push the data into HIVE. Okay. HIVE is nothing but data warehousing solution which sits on top of Hadoop, and it is one of the project which is developed at Microsoft, the Facebook, and similar project is like a Sqoop. So it's one of the project, external project which sits on top of Hadoop. Okay. So what happens is that whenever you fire a command, if I fire an import command, right? So how do I fire a command? Import. So I'll say Sqoop import. So that is how I'll fire it. And then I need to pass certain more parameters and the configurations. And what it will do, it will internally convert the query or the command into the map task. Okay. So say for example, I have my database over here, and I have my the destination is HDFS. Okay. So this is my HDFS, or any of the destination which is available here. Okay. And this is my SQL database. Okay. So what happens if I have to pull a table called employee. So this is my employee table. And employee, once I say employee table, I will have certain columns. I'll say it is ID and it is integer data type. Then I might have the name, and then I'll say it's varchar data type. Okay. And I might have salary, which can be a double data type. So I have these three fields into my table, which is available into this database. Okay. So now if I have to push a data from here to here, okay, so I need to push the data. So what happens? I will say Sqoop, I'll say import, okay, then I will give the table name. Okay, I need to pass the table name, which I'll pass something like this with table name. Okay, and then I will name the table like EMP. Okay, and if I am not defining any queries, it will the tool will interpret it as that I wanted to move the entire data set with the entire column structure. Okay, so then what happens? Sqoop divides this entire data into this table into multiple tasks. Okay, so if I have 1,000 records, this records would be divided across multiple tasks, multiple map tasks. And this is where you are seeing in the diagram the map tasks are available. So if it is 1,000, multiple map tasks would be spawned, and it will do a parallel processing and try to pull the data into multiple files into HDFS. So if you have to read 1,000 records, and if you do it sequentially, it is going to take time. So what happens? It does a parallel thing. It will divide 1,000 into n number of map tasks, which also is configured when you are firing this command. You can configure the number of map tasks with m. Okay, so that is what the flag I'll say, and I can say 10 map tasks. Okay, and that is where it will see that number of map tasks can be spawned. Okay, and if you don't define this, what happens? The Sqoop will take default 4 map tasks. So it expects that 4 is the minimum number of map tasks that needs to be launched when I am launching my Sqoop command. Okay, and if you configure it, it will take the configuration parameter. Right? Okay. So what's next? Once this map task is mapped tasks are defined, then the processing part of Hadoop comes into the picture, and this map tasks are parallelly executed, and it will try to push the data into the destination file system or the destination directory. Okay. Okay. So this is how Sqoop works. So what is different between Sqoop 1 and Sqoop 2? So Sqoop 1, if you okay, so before I go into Sqoop 1 and Sqoop 2, so there is something called connectors. Okay, so very important concept, because right now I said this is my command. I'll just try to clean it up, and the final command which we have seen till now is something like this. I will have to say Sqoop. Okay, I'll say import, and I will say which table I need to connect to or get the data, that is employee table. Then I will say my map task. Okay, the number of map tasks I will say 10. So, but where to pull this data? Okay, from which table it is fine, but where this table is available. So this table is available on certain database, and that database you can connect through the protocol called JDBC protocol or JDBC connector. And this JDBC connector will look something like this for MySQL, and it will have something, a connector. Okay, and then it will say what database it has to connect to. Okay, maybe my database is my company is Wisdom, right? So this is my database, which is a Wisdom database, and I am an employee of wisdom. Okay, so I'll have my employee table in this database. So there are different connectors. So this is for MySQL connector. It will look something like this. But if it is SQL connector, or if it is a EDW data warehouse or a Teradata connector, or it can be any of the different connectors like Oracle and all. So depending on the connector, this connection string will change. Okay, fine. And you can also develop your own connectors. So very important. If it is a new database which is coming in the market, they can implement the connectors which are available in with the default Sqoop, and they can write their own set of connectors. Okay, though Sqoop by default provides a lot of connectors which is for all of these databases, whereas Teradata and all, they are developing their own connector for Hadoop. Okay, and those connectors are pretty fast also, because Teradata again is not free, and that is where it comes into third-party connectors. And similarly for the NoSQL databases also, we have a different set of connectors, right? Because ultimately if you are planning to push data from NoSQL and putting it back into your RDBMS system, you need a connector for that, right? Okay. So what is different between Sqoop 1 and Sqoop 2? As I mentioned, Sqoop 1 was more driven towards CLI, where client interface was there and you fire this command over that. Okay, but it's not possible to embed your Sqoop code into any Java program, because those are not part of some APIs and all. Those APIs were not exposed. Okay, so what happens, they make certain architectural changes. You will understand more about APIs and all. So in the previous session on Hadoop fundamentals, I talked about file system API, right? And then we have seen how I can write my Java code and use this file system API to connect to my Hadoop cluster and then write the code, right? But the same thing cannot happen with Sqoop 1, because of the limitation. It was not exposing any APIs which were like exposed file system for the Hadoop. So they were not having any API exposed. So what they did in the Sqoop 2, this was a drawback, and then they overcome that drawbacks. So now they have a lot of API, which is REST API and Java API, which you can implement and embed your code into the program. Okay, and similarly the next thing is the execution engine. So there were different execution engine, which is one of them was MapReduce, but with the Sqoop 2.x you will have multiple execution engine like Spark and Test. Okay, so this is the diagrammatical representation of Sqoop 2. Let me just take a capture of that. Okay, so this is Sqoop 2.x, and that is under progress. So this Sqoop 2.x works with engine like Spark and Test. So these are two different engines which, apart from the regular MapReduce framework, these are the engine which will help you to do much faster processing. And then you have something called reduce task also, that is now available on top of this in Sqoop 2.x. And then there is some connectors, and the metadata management repository is also available. We will not go into detail about this architecture on Sqoop 2.x because this is still under development. Though you have certain very important things to remember, that we have an API, REST API. You also have a UI where you can fire this Sqoop command. Okay, and it works like client server utility. Now let's go ahead and start seeing couple of examples. How do we get started with Sqoop, and how do I, very first thing I wanted to show you is what is the version of the Sqoop I am running, right? So how do I see which version of Sqoop is running? Okay, and then we will see the import, what all parameters I can pass as part of my import. Okay. And then I will see the list of all the commands which comes on top of Sqoop and how I can use those commands for different operations which I am doing with the Sqoop. Okay. And we'll focus more on what we plan to cover at the beginning of the session, predominantly moving the data into HDFS. We will not touch base upon Hive and HBase in this module. Okay. So my Sqoop is, if I have to start my Sqoop, so starting of, if you can see, the MapReduce is the framework which Sqoop is using. So it is not necessary, it is not only important that Sqoop is up and running, you also need to make sure your Hadoop is also running. Okay, and how do I start my Hadoop? I will start my Hadoop with start all and stop all, as we read in the previous session. So let me go to the terminal and let me fire the command to start the Hadoop. So once this Hadoop gets started, then we will be firing couple of commands on the Sqoop. Okay. So very first command you will see is, you can write Sqoop, though it is not helpful, but it will tell you a lot of information about the Sqoop. So it says, okay, so it says it's not much helpful. It says type Sqoop help for more help, So we will do that. We will try to use Sqoop help, and once I do a Sqoop help, there's a lot of available commands which comes on top of Sqoop. So we will go to this command one by one. The very first command we will see is the version, and I will say Sqoop version, which will tell me what version of Sqoop I am running. Okay, so I am running Sqoop version 1.4.4. It also says it is where we have got this code. So this is JIT framework from where we are getting this code, and then it says that compiled by so and so on so and so date, right? So this is the very brief information about the versioning and all. Then we will go into next help. We have seen how the help list all the commands. So this is the set of commands. Then the next thing is the import. Since we are dealing with importing a table into HDFS, so we will have to fire the command. As I mentioned, I will say Sqoop import, and after this I can say help. Okay, so it will give me a lot of information about import and how I can use import. So okay, so there is a lot of information which comes as part of Sqoop import. Okay. So it says Sqoop import help. Okay, one second. I will have to write with, let me see if I can do with this. Okay, so Sqoop import help, tell me about the importing utility and how I can use it. Okay, so what is that it is saying me? It is telling me, one second guys. Okay, so where we have fired this command? We have fired this command somewhere here. Okay, let me try to clean and then fire it, otherwise it becomes very difficult for me to. Okay, so let me just do one thing. Let me clear up the screen. Okay, I can do a clear and then I can fire this command. Okay, and now I will be able to see lot of information, helpful information about import. Okay, so this is where Sqoop comes very handy. It says what are the common arguments when you are firing import. Okay, and it says you need to pass, let's go ahead and see this. The very first thing you will see is to connect. So how do I connect? And connect, as I mentioned, I need to pass JDBC connection URL to connect to my RDBMS system. Then the command I will need is the username and the password. Okay, the argument, the username and the password I will need to pass the username and the password. And then I will use something. I will not use that import control argument, all of what we have mentioned, but then I can mention for the query. I can also mention for something called direct. We'll talk about direct because it imports the data very fast. Okay, so we will deal with this. And then the number of map tasks, as I mentioned, so this is -m, that is what we will pass as we mentioned. Then we have to say the table name. So what is my table name? And then finally the directory name. So where is the destination directory? Okay, so this is with very minimum command and the argument we will be executing my import statement. And then as and when we go deeper into the session, we will talk more about different type of commands. Okay, fine.